Progress presents The State of the States. And now, your host, Joe Sudbay.
Welcome back to State of the States. As I mentioned at the top, we're going to do politics and policy. We just did the politics with Daniel Squadron, the co-founder of the States Project. Now we're diving into policy, and there's no better organization to discuss policy at the state legislative level than the State Innovation Exchange. And I am so excited to welcome back to the show the Senior Vice President of Programs at SIX, also State Senator Kim Jackson. Welcome back, Kim.
Hi, Joe. So good to be back. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm glad you could join us. So we're at the point where almost every state has concluded their session. There's still some that are going on. Give us your big picture overview of what unfolded in 2026, and then we can dive into some of the specifics.
Yeah, so I think the thing that has dominated the headlines of late is redistricting. But I want your audience to be clear that that's not the only thing that has happened during these legislative sessions. There have been huge topics across the country around data centers, issues around how do we tax the rich because of H.R. 1 passing and the significant holes that were put in state budgets as a result of federal dollars being pulled back. There were real serious conversations about changing the tax structure to tax the rich in many ways to fill those holes. A lot of conversations and actual legislation passed around trying to address issues of affordability. And we're talking about things from limiting AI's ability to rent fix, like to price fix on rent, to making sure that states' housing funds were kind of built up, their housing trust funds were built up, right? So yes, redistricting, and we should talk about redistricting for sure, has been the top hot, huge topic here. But states are doing a lot of things, and to be clear, not only are they doing some great things, they're still on the attack when it comes to LGBTQ communities, when it comes to reproductive rights. We're still having to play offense and defense on those issues as well.
Yeah, it sort of has been a mixed bag, but on the taxing the rich, I think some of the most significant, and this is, from my perspective of being able to talk to state legislators, was the bill that passed in Washington State. We had Representative April Burgon, and then Speaker Fecto from Maine came on to talk about their tax the rich bill. And we know other states have done it. Massachusetts did it by referendum a couple of years ago. It really matters, and people seem to understand the importance of it as well as the policy behind it. Talk a little bit about the conversations you've had and what you've seen unfold.
Yeah, so I'll say that State Innovation Exchange has been really on the front lines of helping legislators think through this policy. I mean, I remember 5 years ago meeting with Senator Noel Frame from Washington State, and she was talking about taxes, and I'm like, what are you doing? And suddenly she was like, just give me 10 minutes, and I'll make you a tax nerd too. And sure enough, she did. I will say, this train towards bringing a more progressive tax structure to states has been out for a long time, but H.R. 1 was absolutely devastating. It was a huge hit for so many states that I think it just created the right moment in time. Also, people's kind of backlash against Trump and the ways in which Elon Musk, essentially bought an election in many people's minds. All of those conditions just made things prime for states like Washington and Maine and Rhode Island to be able to pass these bills. To be clear, that wasn't the first time they were introduced. These things have been worked on for quite some time, but just this was the season. And I think that what we'll see is that state legislators will be able to shore up their state budgets. They'll be able to fill in those holes, but also hopefully be able to return something to their citizens in terms of services that'll be really a plus.
Yeah, it has been one of these years. H.R. 1 did such a number on states, and I think the state legislators and governors are just coming to terms with it. And into the next session, it's really going to hit hard. And it's been interesting over the past year and a half, over the past year, really, Senator Jackson, having conversations with your colleagues around the country and realizing just the impact that the federal government is having on states in ways that they hadn't seen for a while. And then you pile on what the Supreme Court did in the Calais decision, and so much of what's happened in Washington from all three branches of government has had enormous impact in what that will be playing out in state legislatures and needing to come up with these kind of creative solutions to make sure their people are still cared for.
Yeah, that's right. But that's also why I love state legislatures and state policy in general, because we are this incredible laboratory of experiment where we are able to pivot and to push back against the federal government when bad things happen. We're able to kind of protect our citizens. And the reverse is also true, right? Like I represent a red state that certainly has used its power to not pass progressive things. But I do think that is the beauty of kind of the federalist system that we have, that when the federal government pulls back, local legislators who are on the ground in their states and their districts, they get to kind of bring their heads together. And I think the great thing about what we do at State Innovation Exchange is we also help people think across regions, across state lines and regions, so that they can all kind of walk together in a journey to really defend our democracy and to fight back against the autocracy that is we're moving towards.
One of the things you mentioned was data centers, and that is something that has come up more and more in my conversations. And we actually just saw the state Senate president in Utah, the Republican, one of the most powerful political figures in the state, lose his race, his primary, because of his involvement with a data center. What are you hearing from your members around the country? What are you hearing from progressive legislators as they're trying to deal with this issue, which has really, it doesn't just it impacts every state, every part of every state, in rural, urban, suburban. Talk about that a little bit for us.
Yeah, so this has been such an important topic that just feels like it just popped up out of nowhere, even though data centers have been around, but it's the rapid increase that we've seen. And so a couple of things I want to lift up that state lawmakers are really trying to address is one, rural communities have been kind of the prime picking for these data centers to come in. And I think state legislators have begun to do the work to help kind of protect those communities, or to at least put some legislation in place so that there is some community benefit that comes from that. Oftentimes, rural places, their zoning laws are just kind of open for that opportunity, kind of ripe for picking when it comes to building data centers. And so state governments are starting to fight back against that. We've seen also a number of bills that have come through to bring some transparency to just how these data centers operate in terms of what is their water usage, how much of a strain are they putting on our electrical grid. And then biggest of all, I think particularly we've seen this in Georgia, and we've seen this actually across many states, is trying to make sure that data centers pay their fair share when it comes to the impact that they have on the grid, right? And I'll put on a political hat for just 1 second to say, in Georgia, we saw one of the greatest turnouts for a PSC race in the history of Georgia. And it was all because data centers have been driving up the rate that just regular electric payers have been paying, and people were clear in Georgia that they wanted to fight back against that. So data centers are huge. If you had asked me in 2025, was this going to be on my bingo card of things that I would be taking a deep dive in, I would not have, but it is very much a thing that people are fighting back against. And then for those places where they're not fighting against them, they're working really hard to ensure that there are true community benefits that come from having those data centers in their communities.
Yeah, it's really been amazing to watch, and it's just become such a huge issue, and I think in part because it's impacting so many communities, and people are just kind of waking up and thinking, what the hell is this thing? The other issue that is kind of along those lines, it was those ICE warehouses that they were trying to buy and build and force on communities too, and that's another issue that has really been front and center this past year and a half, particularly how states are dealing with ICE coming in and in many places killing people, but certainly terrorizing communities. What have you been seeing on that issue, Senator?
Yeah, so a lot of legislatures opened up in January with ICE being at the top of their mind and the forefront of things that they wanted to address. And so you saw across, I mean, there are more states than I can name, bills introduced to limit the power that ICE has, to demand that ICE remove masks from their face, to make sure that the state can prosecute a federal official, a federal agent, which is not historically been possible, right? So are the ability to prosecute a federal agency for constitutional violations. You've seen a number of those bills, they've actually passed. The courts will make some decisions about those, I think, soon. But I will say, I cannot tell you how many calls I was on across the nation where that was top of mind in January of how do we push back? How do we defend our communities? And I want to do a shout out to my Minnesota legislators for really taking the lead on that. And not only were they thinking about legislation, but they also were thinking about just on the ground mutual aid, and really taught a lot of us how to build up mutual aid programs and policies in our own communities, in our own districts. And so it's been a both and, I think, approach that we've had to addressing ICE across the country. It's the policy side, but also the person to person, how do we care well for our neighbor side?
It really was so inspirational watching. I mean, it was scary watching what ICE was doing, but on the other end of it, what we saw from Minnesota was just so inspiring, and we all needed that kind of inspiration. So let's talk about something else the courts did, and it was something you mentioned right off the top, and it's not the only issue, but I think one of the things I think that's happened over the past 6 to 8 months, really, and probably longer, but there is a growing recognition, finally, I would say, of the important role of state legislatures in our democracy and in the kind of laws that impact us every day. And boy, I don't think anything made that more clear than the Calais decision from the Supreme Court, which basically gutted the Voting Rights Act. And then the response from states like Tennessee and Louisiana was just jarring to watch, the glee with which those Tennessee legislators rammed through legislation to remove political representation from Memphis. Give us your sense of how that has impacted the conversation and what's happening in different states.
Yeah, so I'll actually go back a little further, even
Sure.
before Calais, and remind your listeners of Donald Trump's basically demand that states go back and redraw the lines, right? So we began to see these redistricting attempts mid-cycle, so for most folks in most states, redistricting only happens once every 10 years. It's based on the census. Trump asked for people to draw some more lines because he was afraid about not being able to win in 2026 in Congress. Texas, went boldly forth and started doing that. Remember, California did a referendum to allow themselves to be able to respond to that. So this redistricting thing happened before the Voting Rights Act was gutted. And then this is just a new iteration of it that's really ramped up. And I appreciate you lifting up Tennessee because it is one of the most egregious acts of just power stealing that we have seen happen. And at the same time, I want to lift up that there have been some states where we fought back and won. So South Carolina said that they were going to do it, came in a special session to do it. And to their credit, Republican legislators alongside Democratic legislators said, no, we will not do this because we don't want to choose our voters. We believe that the voters should be able to choose us. And so South Carolina was able to stop it. Georgia was able to stop it as well. So we've had some wins. This has largely been a Southern fight, right? And I'm grateful. I think we will continue to see more attempts at redistricting happening as we get closer and closer to 28. And so it'll be interesting to see the ways in which people power is really able to activate and motivate to keep those districts from being gerrymandered even further. I want to be clear with folks already, like the districts are already gerrymandered. They're not fair districts today already. So this is just to do further damage to limit minority power.
So I'm so glad you went back to Texas because that was really what put redistricting on the line. And if you worry about, and so many folks do, rightly so, who's going to control the U.S. House, who's going to control the Senate, you realize even more now that you have to look back at your state legislature. And let's not just glide past what happened in Georgia because there was a date set. June 17th was set for special session had been called to bring you all back to do redistricting, and then it was canceled. And it's not like they're done with it, but that was a pretty significant, got a lot of news. You obviously in the Georgia legislature, give us a little insight into how that happened.
Yeah, I mean, so I will say we showed up on June 17th ready to fight. We had hundreds of people who were caravanning around the Capitol. We're in our Liberty Plaza, which is our free speech area that we have on Capitol grounds. Democrats, Senator Raphael Warnock flew down from DC, missed House votes in order to meet with both Democratic caucuses and to pray with us and inspire us in this journey. I mean, we were ready to fight. And special sessions was called to start at 2 o'clock. We did our big rally at noon with hundreds of people saying we demand fair maps, calling on people to live into their better selves, right? And then at 1 o'clock, Republicans gathered on the same exact steps. I'll tell you, they looked a whole lot different than our coalition um, in terms of race and gender diversity, but nonetheless, uh, so at 1 o'clock, Republicans gathered on those same exact steps where we had asked for an end to this, and they announced that they would not be doing it. And there are a lot of different pieces into this, right? I want to be clear: our fight in Georgia is not over, and that is really for them. It was a not yet or not right now. They will redistrict at some point because they feel like they've got that opening from the Cali decision. But it was a huge victory for advocates and for us as a caucus to be able to at least hold back the floodgates for now so that we can hopefully even really turn out in November. And if we flip our chambers, we get a governor, then it'll actually really put those things on hold. So we're really optimistic. And I want to just lift up the power of the people. It was incredibly beautiful to see and to be buoyed by the presence of so many folks.
I get goosebumps from that. I love hearing that. I followed it pretty closely, but it was I love hearing the inside story and the timing. And like you said, they have already gerrymandered. Georgia's gerrymandered, North Carolina, Wisconsin was. They've sort of started to fix it, but there has been a lot of gerrymandering and trying to dilute the vote, and so much voter suppression. And part of that is so much of that is done at the state level. So Senator Kim
So, Joe,
Jackson.
can I just add a
Sure,
little
please.
nuance to that?
Yeah.
So, I would argue that in a place like Georgia, South Carolina, and then the South, and probably all over, honestly, but I know a lot about the Southern region. The current maps that people are operating on have already been gerrymandered to the max possible in terms of partisanship. They have already, when it comes to only looking at the maps based on partisanship, they have maxed that out within the legal law, right? So now that the Voting Rights Act has been pretty much gutted when it comes to race, now they get to come back around with race in really targeted ways and say, take a South Carolina district where South Carolina has Clyburn, that one district down in Charleston. Now they can really pinpoint him and explode that district in the same way you saw them do in Memphis, right? So let's just be really clear. They are partisanly gerrymandered to the max already. Now they're really coming after minority votes.
Absolutely. I'm glad you added that because it's so important. And I'm just glad you could join us today. I mean, I could talk to you all day, Senator Jackson. Let me just ask, I know so many of our listeners are interested in the politics, but certainly the policy. State Innovation Exchange, I think, has been a godsend for state legislators and for people who care about progressive policy. Where's the best place for our folks to join in and become part of your team?
Yeah, so we work very closely with legislators and connecting them with local organizations. But we are legislator centered in terms of the operations and things that we provide. So I encourage you, if you know your local legislator and if they're not connected with SIX, send them to stateinnovation.org. Tell them to sign up, get on our newsletter, get the content that we provide, and just come reach out to us. We have certain areas that we really focus on a lot in terms of being able to help legislators be skilled up around issues around ag and food systems, obviously fighting back against data centers. We have a strong economy program. If you're interested in democracy and fighting against authoritarianism, those are some things you want to send it. And I'll say this, especially now as we're in voting season and you're seeing new legislators come in from January. If your legislator is brand new and they had all the right values, they were values aligned, and you were excited to get out there and vote for them, they need to be connected to us. So tell them, look out, we're going to do that outreach too, but it matters even more when a constituent says, hey, you need to be connected to SIX.
Oh, such a great point. Oh, thank you so much for joining us today and for the work you do. Senator Kim Jackson, Senate District 41 in Georgia, and Senior Vice President of Program at State Innovation Exchange, better known as SIX. Thank you so much for joining us today on State of the States.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to see you as always.
All right.